That model you see right there is the same guy. I did that years earlier. The person I'm modeling is Paul Dillett, and I'm starting off with just a cylinder, and then I'm dynameshing it, and I'm stretching out the hand and the shoulder. And I initially was just going to do the arm, but just to put the arm in context, I added the torso. I flipped the other arm over. So the end product will be both arms and a torso and a neck, rough neck, no head. And right now I'm just fleshing out mainly the extensor muscles, which is the outer part of the forearm, the upper outer part of the forearm, and the flexors, the inner part of the forearm. And this whole thing took about an hour and a half, and this is time-lapsed at 5 times the speed. So this is an 18-minute video, but it took me roughly an hour and a half. And I can easily see me getting down my real-time time. It took me to do it down to about 15 minutes or less. I'm talking about the final product I have. I mean, I could envision getting it done in 10 minutes instead of an hour and a half, because once you commit the anatomy to your memory, you don't have to keep referring back to reference. That's what slows you down more than anything. And it's not only that, but let's say this part right here, I wasn't looking at reference for this part right here until you see a photograph on the left-hand side of Paul Dillett. That's when I started looking at the reference. But even this part where I'm doing it from memory, when you're having to do experiments, like I do a little bit more here of the arm, and I move the tricep back. Oh, that doesn't look right. And I'll move it back a little bit more. And then, that's, and you keep going back and forth, hunting and pecking until you get it right. That slows you down like crazy. And then even when you have the reference, first of all, you have to search for the reference. This one's a little different because I'm doing a likeness at the end, and I think anybody would have to have a reference unless they committed somebody they're not that familiar with to memory. And everybody's body looks, especially when it's developed like that, you could just tell them apart just based on the body, or body part even. Paul Dillett has different biceps than Schwarzenegger and everybody else under the sun. It's that clear to somebody that follows it how different just like the calf or something would be from bodybuilder to bodybuilder. But even when you're copying from photographs, you're still looking back and forth instead of just concentrating on your model. A lot of times you're not working on it, you're just looking at something else. So that's my goal right now, is to just get these down to 5 times or 6 times quicker than I do them. And just no hunting and pecking. Getting the exact shape I want initially, and then just refining it as I go along. And this I'm dynameshing. I've been dynameshing as I go along. And I don't subdivide it at all, just the dynamesh. So when I stretched it, the resolution is the same throughout the model. And right there is when I started looking at reference. I could have gone further and had it look somewhat similar to the final product, but I wanted to speed it up. And Dillett is known for being like a monster-sized guy. What stands out a lot is the outer part of the forearms, mainly the forearms in general, but the outer part of the forearms, the brachioradialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus below it, that's what comprises that bump in the middle of the arm, which kind of bridges the biceps, or it bridges the upper arm to the lower arm. And I did a video before this where it shows from the upper part of the bicep all the way down to the bottom of that brachialis muscle, where it looks like an S shape. I'm not making this like where every muscle is clearly delineated like a cookie cutter anatomy chart, mainly because it doesn't really look natural. I mean, people do that to learn anatomy. Also, in real life, a lot of muscles blend together visually. I mean, you still have the regular separation underneath the skin, but you can see on Dillett, for example, a lot of times his front deltoid blends in with the pectoral muscle, whereas everybody that sculpts an anatomy or draws an anatomy will make that clear, diagonal line between the upper pectoral and the deltoid muscle. But sometimes it's not there. You don't see it as much. And then I switched to Schwarzenegger here, mainly because I didn't have reference, or it's probably out there, but I didn't quickly find reference of Dillett. And they don't have exactly the same type of physiques, but Schwarzenegger kind of has hanging shoulders, sloping shoulders, and so does Dillett. There is some kind of similarity between the two. I mean, if you look at somebody like bodybuilder like Frank Zane or Steve Reeves, they're not similar to Dillett or Schwarzenegger. But Schwarzenegger and Dillett, I mean, there are some similarities. Of course, Schwarzenegger retired in 1980. And people were on a lot of stuff that made them a lot bigger subsequent to his retirement. So, I mean, Schwarzenegger could have been maybe bigger than Dillett for all we know if he was the same age and competing today. So my main goal on this was just an arm exercise, but I ended up, just to put the arms in context, sculpting a lot of the torso. And what I ended up doing with the torso, or specifically the chest, was using the inflate tool and deformations to blow out the pectoral muscles instead of necessarily sculpting them all the way through. What I did was I masked off the pectoral muscles. Then I inverted the mask, and then I used the inflate tool under deformations to inflate the pectoral muscles to a certain degree, and that gave them more of a three-dimensional look that you see on the left. With Dillett, their muscles are coming towards you, as opposed to what I have there so far, they're flat. But it's kind of overkill if you just use the deformation tool. And I did it on the, I'm not sure if I did, I don't remember, I think I did it on all three axes, X, Y, and Z. I'm not 100% sure. But then I had to go back and get rid of some of the excess inflation that I created, and that was mainly on the lower part of the chest. But it gave me a head start, just adding some mass to it that I could later refine. And then I'm working on the trapezius, trying to create that little notch in between the trapezius and the neck, that little area where there's no trapezius and no neck muscles. It's kind of like an indent on both sides. And there I'm adding length to the arms. That's the good thing about ZBrush and digital sculpture. It's not like clay where you have to tear it apart and redo it. You can quickly on the fly just add length to the arm. I could have also left the arms that size and just made the torso a little smaller and moved the shoulders up, but I decided it was easier just to make the arms a little longer. And it's shaping up a little bit better here, actually a lot better than it was, getting some of the bugs out. You don't really want any awkward stages in your model. You want to have keep a professional look to it all along, but this is starting to come around a little bit. And I'm rotating the hands in just to make it look a little bit more like the photograph. I'm not concentrating too much on the anatomy of the forms as far as getting all the detail. I'm mainly just trying to give the indication of the hands in that same pose as you see in the photograph on the left. And what I'm trying to do here, which I didn't do initially, is add to the back of the forearms the flexor muscles, which are the inner part of the forearms, extend beyond the bone you see in the back of the arm of the forearm, and I didn't have that there, and it really sells the three-dimensionality that makes it look more realistic when you have the flexor muscles going back beyond the bone. They're not flush with the bone or in front of it. They are in back of it. And there's where I'm blowing up the chest using the inflate tool. Now, this isn't going to be animated. I mean, you could animate it to a degree, but adding the torso was an afterthought, and I have right now the triceps blending in with the back muscles, and that's okay for this demonstration. But if I was animating this, I would have the arms spread out like imaginary lat syndrome, where your arms are really wide, so I could animate them where they're not built into the back. This is done more like a sculpture as opposed to something you can actually animate like you would do in a regular movie. And that line in the back is just the bone, the separation between the flexor muscles and the extensor muscles. And I'm just hiding part of the model so I can work on the inner part of the biceps, unobstructed by the torso. And when you end up adding the torso to this, like I did, instead of just sticking with the arm, I end up having to keep going back and forth to make the torso in proportion to the forearms. And Dillett has an unusual amount of muscle mass on the lower part of the forearms near the wrist. I mean, there's photos where his wrist really doesn't look that big. It doesn't seem to have like almost a thin wrist, but he's got so much muscle, these abductor and extensor muscles of the thumb. It's kind of unusual. I mean, usually when people have a big wrist, it's due to the big bones in the wrist. He has a like inflated wrist because of all the muscle. And you can see in the back there where I have the tricep blending in with the lats, which is okay for a shoulder if I use the damn standard tool, which is one of the three tools I'm using. I'm using standard tool, move tool, and the damn standard DAM standard tool, which is used to like cut into areas. And that's what I would use to cut, if I wanted to, cut into the separation between the tricep and the lat muscle. But I'm not really that concerned with it. I'm just more concerned, and for this particular model, I'm more concerned as far as the shape of the arms. And there I'm putting in what they call the Christmas tree back to some degree. You can see it in the photograph to the left, where there's like a triangle shape in the lower part of the back, and then there's striations that emanate from the spinal area outward, and they look kind of like branches, and that's what they call a Christmas tree back. And like everybody has those nowadays. They didn't used to in the past when people started having them because they got more and more development as, you know, bodybuilding, quote, evolved. And people also kept getting leaner and leaner, which would show those muscles even on a skinny person. Those muscles became known in that pose as a Christmas tree back. Because it looks like the branches branching out the striations. And I'm not going into great detail, like I say, on the back. It's just just the basic shape of it. Show where everything is, just so I can get, spend more time on the forearms with some kind of basic suggestion of where the muscles are in the back. And there's a lot of individual flexor muscles on the inner part of the forearm, but a lot of times they just blend together. Plus, people have veins on the arms. People generally, I mean, a lot of comic book artists just make like the extensors one big mass and the flexors one big mass. At the same time, you see people that draw the Hulk or some characters, they draw every single muscle. That's probably more for covers and stuff like that. I try to spend enough time on the structural elements underneath the muscles, like the clavicle and the scapula and the elbow and the separation between the forearms and between the extensors and the flexors of the forearm. And that's very important. Even if somebody has muscle covering up a lot of the bone areas, still the bony landmarks will show up no matter how much development you have in the clavicles and the elbow, etc. Even if they do cover up, the chest, the skinny might have a real bony chest. Now I'm liking the way it's looking here, and I added the different material to show the highlights so I can get a different perspective on it. A lot of people change back and forth from different materials as they go along to get a different take on it. Some people also even go silhouette, where they're not even, they put a material on there where they just see a black or white silhouette to give them some kind of indication. They flip the model around and it helps them. I don't do that as much. I mean, you can, obviously something they get out of it. So I would like to get something like this done in maybe, 10 minutes or something like this to this point, but that comes with studying the anatomy, and then you won't have to refer to reference and have and hunt and peck and move this, move that, and trial and error to get where you want to go so it visually looks right. You'll know what you're doing every single step of the way, and it'll save so much time. And that's as far as I took it.